There's a specific moment when the avoidant finally understands what's happening. Not when you tell them you're unhappy. They can defend against that. Not when you express your needs. They've learned to minimize those. Not even when you threaten to leave. Threats have always been negotiable. Boundaries have always been movable. You've always stayed before, despite saying you might go. But there's a moment when something in their nervous system finally registers the truth. You're actually leaving. Not threatening. Not crying about it. Not trying to make them understand one more time. Actually, genuinely, irreversibly detaching. They feel it before they see it. Feel the shift in your energy. Feel you withdrawing investment in ways that don't announce themselves through words, but through the quality of your presence, the tone of your responses, the way you've stopped leaning toward them and started leaning toward the door. You're still physically there, maybe, still going through motions. But something essential has shifted, and their body knows it, even if their mind hasn't caught up. You're losing interest in making this work, losing hope that they'll change, losing attachment to the outcome of this relationship. You're losing them, not in the sense that they're losing access to you, but in the sense that they're becoming irrelevant to your emotional landscape in real time. And this feeling, this visceral recognition that they're losing you in ways that feel final, triggers something in the avoidant that all your previous attempts to reach them never triggered. It bypasses their defended system in ways that your pursuit never did, your patience never accomplished, your love never achieved. Because pursuit confirmed they could keep you through minimal effort. Patience confirmed they had unlimited time to change or not change. Love confirmed you'd tolerate their patterns indefinitely. But you detaching confirms none of those comfortable assumptions are true. And the feeling of losing you, of becoming irrelevant to someone who organized their life around you, creates crisis in their nervous system that produces behavior that's completely unexpected based on everything you know about how avoidants operate. This isn't the behavior you've seen during the relationship. This isn't their typical defended response. This is something else. Something desperate and undefended and sometimes genuinely transformative or sometimes spectacularly destructive. Understanding what they'll do when they feel they're actually losing you helps you recognize the behavior for what it is, crisis response, not capacity, and protects you from mistaking their unexpected behavior for evidence they've become someone they haven't become. The 3 signs. They're feeling the loss before they consciously recognize it. The avoidant often feels they're losing you before they consciously recognize the shift, and their behavior changes in specific ways that reveal the unconscious panic beginning to activate their system. They become hypervigilant about your emotional state, suddenly noticing and commenting on changes in your mood or energy that they previously ignored completely. During most of the relationship, they didn't track your emotional state closely. Didn't notice when you were upset unless you explicitly told them. Didn't register your moods or energy shifts. This lack of attunement was part of the defended distance they maintained. Not paying close attention to your internal state protected them from feeling responsible for affecting that state. But when they start to feel they're losing you, hypervigilance activates. Suddenly they're noticing everything, commenting on your mood, asking if something's wrong, noticing when you're quieter than usual, or when your responses are shorter, or when you seem distant in ways you weren't before. This sudden attunement isn't them becoming more emotionally available. It's their threat detection system activating. Their nervous system recognizes threat to the relationship and responds by monitoring you closely for signs that confirm or disconfirm the threat. The hypervigilance is fear-driven surveillance, not genuine increased emotional connection. They're watching you because they feel they're losing you, and watching is an attempt to gather information about whether the feeling is accurate and how much time they have before the loss becomes irreversible. They initiate contact more frequently than usual, breaking their typical pattern of making you do the reaching out, which signals their anxiety about your availability. Throughout the relationship, you've probably been the one initiating most contact, reaching out first, suggesting plans, checking in. Their pattern was letting you pursue while they responded when convenient. But when they feel they're losing you, this pattern reverses. Suddenly, they're the one initiating, texting you first, suggesting getting together, checking in about your day. This role reversal is significant. It's breaking pattern that felt safe to them, pattern where you pursued and they controlled whether to respond. The fact that they're breaking this pattern to initiate contact reveals their anxiety. They're pursuing you because the usual pattern isn't working anymore. You're not pursuing them with the consistency you used to, and the absence of your pursuit is creating enough anxiety that they're overriding their defended preference for being pursued rather than pursuing. The increased initiation is evidence they feel the shift and are trying to restore your engagement through being more present than their typical pattern allows. They make small gestures of effort they've never made before, doing minor things you've asked for repeatedly, as if testing whether small changes can restore what's slipping away. Suddenly, they're doing things you've asked for throughout the relationship that they never did before. Remembering something you mentioned wanting, following through on small commitment, making tiny effort towards something you've expressed needing. These gestures are confusing because you asked for these exact things months ago and they didn't do them. Why now? The small gestures are test. They're offering minimum viable effort to see if minimal change can restore your engagement. If you respond positively to small gesture, if you seem warmer, more present, more invested, they know they can keep you through minimal effort. If you don't respond positively to small gestures, if you remain detached despite their effort, they're gathering information that the crisis is deeper than they thought, and minimal effort won't be sufficient. Watch this pattern. The small gestures that you've wanted for months suddenly appearing when they feel they're losing you aren't evidence they finally care about your needs. They're strategic offerings designed to test whether minimal effort can prevent the loss they're sensing without requiring them to make substantial changes to their patterns. The unexpected thing they'll do. They'll drop their defenses completely, but only in crisis, not from transformation. When the avoidant finally feels with certainty that they're losing you, the behavior that emerges is shocking in its complete departure from everything they've been during the relationship. And understanding what's driving it protects you from confusing crisis with capacity. They'll become suddenly vulnerable in ways they never were during the entire relationship, expressing feelings, naming fears, asking directly for what they want with emotional honesty that seems like breakthrough. The defended person who couldn't express emotions clearly, who couldn't name what they were feeling, who couldn't ask directly for what they wanted, suddenly becomes emotionally articulate. They tell you exactly how much you mean to them. They name their fear of losing you. They express vulnerability about their patterns and their wounds. They ask you directly to stay, to give them another chance, to believe they can be different. This emotional honesty is shocking because it's exactly what you wanted during the entire relationship and never got. You asked them to tell you how they felt, and they couldn't or wouldn't. You wanted them to be vulnerable, and they stayed defended. You needed them to communicate clearly about their needs, and they remained ambiguous. Now suddenly, when they're about to lose you, they're doing all of it. The emotional honesty seems like breakthrough, like they've finally developed the capacity for vulnerability you needed. But the vulnerability isn't coming from developed capacity. It's coming from crisis overriding their defenses. When threat of loss becomes sufficiently intense, it temporarily disables the defensive system that usually prevents vulnerability. They're not being vulnerable because they've learned to be vulnerable. They're being vulnerable because they're in panic state, where defenses have been overwhelmed by fear of permanent loss. They'll make grand promises about changing specific patterns, with detail and conviction that makes it seem like they finally understand what needs to change and are committed to changing it. Along with vulnerability comes promises, specific promises about changing the exact patterns you've named as problems. I'll stop withdrawing when things get intense. I'll go to therapy consistently. I'll communicate when I'm triggered instead of disappearing. I'll work on being emotionally available. I'll stop prioritizing my defensive comfort over your needs. The promises are specific, detailed, delivered with conviction that makes them seem real. This specificity is compelling because it proves they've heard you. They know what the patterns are. They understand what needs to change. They're committing to specific behavioral changes rather than vague promises to do better. But specific promises made during crisis aren't evidence of capacity to fulfill those promises once crisis passes. Crisis creates temporary state where the avoidant can imagine being different because the pain of losing you makes any change seem preferable to the loss. But imagining being different during crisis is different from sustaining different behavior after crisis resolves. The promises are genuine in the moment. They genuinely believe they'll do what they're promising while they're in crisis state. But belief in the moment doesn't create sustainable transformation after a moment passes. They'll do something completely out of character, showing up unannounced, writing a letter, making a public gesture that reveals how much they're struggling with losing you. The crisis often produces behavior that's completely inconsistent with their defended pattern. The person who maintained emotional distance suddenly shows up at your door. The person who couldn't express feelings in person writes pages articulating everything they've never said. The person who kept relationship private makes public gesture, posting about their feelings, telling mutual friends they're fighting to keep you, making their vulnerability visible to others in ways they'd never do during relationship. This out-of-character behavior is shocking. It's the opposite of how they've been. The defended avoidant becoming the pursuing vulnerable person is complete role reversal, and the reversal seems like evidence of transformation, but it's evidence of crisis. Crisis makes people behave in ways that are inconsistent with their typical patterns because crisis overwhelms the patterns temporarily. The out-of-character behavior is genuine. They're genuinely in crisis state, where defended patterns aren't functioning the way they usually function. But crisis-driven behavior doesn't predict sustained behavior after crisis passes. They're capable of being this person in crisis. That doesn't mean they're capable of being this person consistently over time. The uncomfortable mirror. Turn. Why part of you wants them to do this unexpected thing, but examine honestly why part of you wants the avoidant to drop their defenses and fight for the relationship. Why you're reading about what unexpected thing they'll do when they feel they're losing you. Why some part of you hopes they'll panic enough to finally show up the way you've needed them to show up. Because if you were genuinely ready to leave, genuinely done with someone who couldn't meet your needs, genuinely choosing yourself, you wouldn't care what they do when they feel they're losing you. You'd be too busy leaving to track their response to your leaving. The fact that you want to know what unexpected thing they'll do reveals you're still hoping they'll finally become who you've needed them to be. Hoping the crisis of losing you will create the transformation that your love never created. Hoping they'll drop their defenses and fight for you in ways that would prove you matter enough to make them vulnerable. This hope is keeping you partially attached to outcome you claim you're done hoping for. And this attachment to their crisis response is preventing you from fully choosing yourself. Because fully choosing yourself means you leave regardless of whether they drop their defenses. You leave because the relationship doesn't serve you, not because they won't fight for it. You leave because you deserve better, not because they won't promise to be better. If your leaving is contingent on them not doing the unexpected thing, not dropping defenses, not making promises, not fighting for the relationship, then you're not actually choosing yourself. You're creating tests they might pass, and passing the test might make you stay in relationship that fundamentally doesn't work. Choose yourself regardless of what unexpected thing they do. Choose yourself whether they stay defended or drop their defenses. Choose yourself whether they let you go easily or fight desperately to keep you. Your choice needs to be independent of their response. That's what actually choosing yourself means. Not waiting to see if they'll finally show up. Choosing to leave because staying doesn't serve you, regardless of whether they transform in response to your leaving. Why the unexpected behavior, however genuine, doesn't mean they're ready for the relationship you need. The avoidance crisis-driven vulnerability and promises feel like exactly what you've been waiting for, but understanding why crisis response isn't readiness protects you from accepting promises instead of requiring proof. Crisis vulnerability is temporary state that resolves when crisis passes, and crisis passes the moment you agree to stay, eliminating the motivation for continued vulnerability. They're vulnerable now because they're losing you. The vulnerability is crisis response. But what happens when crisis resolves? When you agree to stay, when you give them another chance, when the threat of losing you is removed, the crisis ends. And when crisis ends, crisis-driven vulnerability ends with it. They're being vulnerable because fear is overwhelming their defenses. When fear is removed, defenses return. This is how crisis-driven behavior works. It's not sustainable. It's emergency response that lasts as long as emergency lasts. The moment emergency is over, the moment they have you back, the defended patterns return because the patterns are driven by nervous system programming. That crisis temporarily overrides but doesn't reprogram. If you stay because of their crisis vulnerability, you're staying because of temporary state that will resolve the moment you remove the crisis by staying. You'll have accepted them back based on behavior that will disappear once they feel secure again. They're promising future change without having done any of the current work, which means the promises are based on crisis-driven desire rather than demonstrated capacity. Listen to what they're promising. I'll start therapy. I'll work on my patterns. I'll be different this time. Future tense. They'll start. They'll work. They'll be. All promises about what they will do, not what they have done. This means they haven't actually done any work yet, haven't been in therapy, haven't practiced different responses to triggers, haven't developed new capacity. They're promising to do work in exchange for you staying. But promises to do work aren't the same as having done work. Crisis makes them believe they'll do the work because crisis creates intense motivation. But crisis-created motivation doesn't sustain after crisis passes. If they were serious about transformation, they'd have started the work before the crisis. They'd be able to point to months of therapy already completed. They'd demonstrate change responses in current behavior. They'd have evidence of work in progress, not just promises of work they'll begin if you stay. Accept evidence, not promises. Require demonstrated work over time, not commitments to start working. The nervous system responses that created their patterns don't change through crisis, they change through sustained therapeutic work that rewires automatic responses. Their patterns weren't choices, weren't conscious decisions to hurt you, were automatic nervous system responses to triggers. Intimacy triggered threat response that produced withdrawal. Vulnerability triggered panic that produced emotional unavailability. Dependence triggered fear that produced defended distance. These responses are biological, automatic, happening below the level of conscious control. Crisis doesn't reprogram nervous system. Crisis temporarily overrides patterns through intense fear, but override isn't reprogramming. The automatic responses are still there, waiting to activate once crisis-driven override stops functioning. Reprogramming nervous system requires specific therapeutic work, EMDR, somatic experiencing, prolonged exposure to triggers in safe context with new responses, months or years of consistent practice creating new neural pathways. None of this happens through crisis. None of this happens through promises. It only happens through sustained work with trauma specialist who understands attachment. If they haven't done this work, their nervous system will produce the same patterns once crisis passes, regardless of how genuine their current desire to be different is. The 3 possible outcomes. When the avoidant does the unexpected thing, and why only one actually serves you. Understanding the possible outcomes when the avoidant drops their defenses helps you navigate their crisis response with clarity about what each outcome means for your future. Outcome 1. You stay because of their crisis response, and they revert to patterns once they feel secure, recreating the same dynamic that wasn't working before. If you stay because of their vulnerability and promises, if you give them another chance based on crisis behavior, if you believe the unexpected thing they're doing is evidence of transformation, you'll likely get this outcome. They'll be different for a period, the honeymoon period, where crisis-driven motivation is still active. They'll try. They'll be more vulnerable. They'll follow through on some promises. And then, gradually or suddenly, the defended patterns will return. They'll start withdrawing again. Emotional availability will decrease. The vulnerability that seemed like breakthrough will be replaced by familiar defended distance. You'll be back in the same dynamic that wasn't working before the crisis. This outcome is most common because it's what happens when crisis-driven behavior is mistaken for sustainable transformation. The crisis passed when you stayed. The motivation to be different decreased when they felt secure again. The patterns returned because the patterns were never addressed through actual therapeutic work. You'll have wasted more time in relationship that fundamentally doesn't work, having been convinced by crisis response to give another chance that produces same outcome. Outcome 2. You leave despite their crisis response, and they use the loss as motivation for genuine therapeutic work. But the transformation benefits their future, not your present with them. If you maintain your boundary despite their vulnerability, if you leave even though they're dropping defenses and making promises, if you choose yourself regardless of the unexpected thing they're doing, this outcome becomes possible. They lose you permanently, and the loss is painful enough that they do genuine work. Get into sustained therapy. Work on their attachment patterns with specialists. Do the uncomfortable transformative work over months and years. Reprogram their nervous system responses. Develop actual capacity they didn't have before. This transformation is real, and it's transformation that benefits their future, benefits their future partner, benefits the version of them that exists years from now, after sustained work. But it doesn't benefit you because you're not there. You left. You're building life without them. Their transformation is happening without you and doesn't involve you. This outcome is good for them. It's irrelevant to you, except as confirmation that leaving someone who wasn't capable was right choice, that forced them to develop capacity they wouldn't have developed if you'd stayed. Outcome 3. You leave and they don't transform, but you build life that proves leaving was right choice, regardless of whether they ever become capable. This is the outcome that actually serves you. You leave. You don't wait to see if they'll transform. You don't track whether they do the work. You don't organize any energy around their journey after losing you. You just build. Build life that's so fulfilling, so aligned with who you are, so much better than life with them, was that it proves, through your lived experience, rather than through their transformation or lack thereof, that leaving was absolutely correct choice. Whether they transform or don't transform becomes irrelevant because you're thriving either way. Whether they develop capacity or stay stuck becomes background noise because your capacity for thriving doesn't depend on their capacity for growth. This outcome serves you because it's only outcome where your well-being is independent of their journey. You're not waiting for them to justify your leaving by transforming. You're not needing them to stay stuck to validate that leaving was right. You're building life so good that their entire existence, transformation or stagnation, is just interesting distant fact that doesn't affect your joy. This is the outcome that actually frees you. What the unexpected thing actually reveals about the relationship and what you deserve. The avoidant dropping their defenses when they feel they're losing, you create specific revelations worth understanding clearly, so you can use this knowledge to inform your choice rather than letting it pull you backward. Their crisis proves you were always valuable enough to fight for. They just weren't threatened enough to fight until losing you became real. The unexpected vulnerability, the promises, the out-of-character behavior, all of it proves something important. You were always valuable enough to fight for. Your worth was always sufficient to deserve their effort. You always deserved the vulnerability they're showing now, the promises they're making now, the fighting for the relationship they're doing now. You deserved all of this during the relationship, but they didn't give it to you during the relationship because they didn't feel threatened during the relationship. They felt secure, felt like they could maintain patterns without losing you, felt like your patience was infinite and your tolerance was unlimited. The crisis of losing you is what activated the fighting, not your worth suddenly increasing. Your worth was constant. What changed is their perception of threat. This proves the problem was never you, was never your value being insufficient, was always their feeling too secure to prioritize your needs. And this should infuriate you, should confirm that leaving someone who only fights for you when losing you is real is exactly right choice. You deserve someone who fights for the relationship before crisis, who values you enough to address patterns before patterns cost them the relationship, who doesn't need threat of loss to motivate effort. The fact that they can drop defenses in crisis proves the defenses were always choice, conscious or unconscious choice to prioritize their comfort over your needs. If they can be vulnerable in crisis, they were always capable of vulnerability. If they can make promises about changing patterns in crisis, they always understood what the patterns were and what needed to change. If they can do unexpected, vulnerable thing when they're losing you, they could have done vulnerable thing during relationship when you were begging for vulnerability. The fact that crisis unlocks these capacities proves the capacities existed all along. They just weren't willing to access them. They chose defended comfort over accessing capacities that would have required discomfort. This choice, and it was choice even if unconscious choice, prioritized their comfort over your needs for entire relationship. They chose feeling safe through defended distance over making you feel secure through vulnerable presence. They chose protecting themselves over honoring you. The crisis proves they could have chosen differently all along. They just didn't choose differently until choosing defended comfort was about to cost them something they couldn't tolerate losing. This should eliminate any remaining question about whether you were asking too much. You weren't. You were asking for things they were capable of giving. They just weren't willing to give them until crisis made the cost of not giving them too high. Your leaving or near leaving, creating this response proves you were too patient, too accommodating, too willing to stay through patterns that should have produced earlier consequences. If it took you leaving or nearly leaving to create the crisis that produced their unexpected response, it means you stayed too long, gave too many chances, tolerated too much. You should have left earlier, before you were this depleted, before you'd given this much, before the relationship had taken this much toll on you. Your excessive patience taught them they didn't have to change. Your unlimited tolerance taught them patterns were sustainable. Your staying despite the patterns taught them they could maintain defended comfort without consequences. If you'd enforced consequences earlier, if you'd left the first time they violated important boundary, if you'd made needs non-negotiable from the beginning, if you'd been less patient and more boundaried, you'd have saved yourself months or years of depletion, and you'd have given them earlier crisis that might have motivated earlier change. Your staying too long served neither of you, didn't serve you because you absorbed harm for extended period, didn't serve them because it prevented them from experiencing consequences early enough to motivate change while you were still willing to build with them. The unexpected thing they're doing now when you're leaving is proof you should have left earlier, should have been less patient, should have enforced boundaries before you were this done. The permanent truth about what the unexpected thing actually means for your future. They're dropping their defenses, making promises, doing the unexpected vulnerable thing, fighting for you in ways they never fought during the relationship. And here's what all of that actually means. Crisis made them capable of temporary behavior that won't sustain without sustained work. You shouldn't wait around to see if they do. The vulnerability is real. The promises are genuine. The fighting is authentic. All of it is true in this moment of crisis, and none of it predicts sustained transformation after crisis passes. Crisis creates temporary capacity that disappears when crisis resolves. If you stay, you're staying based on temporary capacity that will revert to familiar patterns once you've stayed long enough that they feel secure again. If you leave, you're choosing yourself over temporary crisis response and creating space for your own transformation rather than organizing your life around whether they'll sustain theirs. Either they'll use loss as motivation for genuine, sustained work, which is their journey that doesn't involve you, or they won't do the work and will repeat patterns with next person, which is also their journey that doesn't involve you. Your journey is building life so extraordinary that their transformation, or lack thereof, is just weather happening in distance. Whether they become capable after losing you or stay stuck forever doesn't affect your thriving because your thriving is independent of their journey. Let them do the unexpected thing. Let them drop their defenses and make promises and fight for the relationship in ways they never fought when they weren't losing you. Let all of it happen and leave anyway. Not because you're being cruel or unforgiving, because you understand that crisis-driven capacity isn't sustainable transformation, because you deserve someone who chooses you before crisis, because you're worth more than someone who only fights for you when losing you becomes real, because accepting them back based on promises made in crisis is accepting substitute for actual, demonstrated, sustained change. Because your leaving might be the thing that finally motivates their transformation, but their potential transformation isn't your responsibility to wait around for. Leave, build, thrive, whether they do the unexpected thing or don't do it, whether they transform or stay stuck, whether they become capable years from now or never become capable. All of that is their journey. Your journey is forward, into life that doesn't organize around crisis, responses from people who couldn't show up for you when showing up didn't require crisis. That's the path. That's your future. That's what the unexpected thing they'll do actually teaches you about what you deserve. Not a partner who drops defenses in crisis. A partner who doesn't need crisis to value you enough to remain vulnerable and present and fighting for the relationship, even when that fighting is uncomfortable, Find that. Be that for yourself first by choosing yourself. Then find someone who's already that without requiring crisis to activate it. That's what you deserve. The unexpected thing they're doing proves they were always capable. Your leaving proves you finally know you deserve someone who accesses their capacity without needing to feel they're losing you. That's the truth. That's freedom. That's your future. Claim it. That's the truth. That's freedom. That's your future. Claim it. Why the crisis they're experiencing when they feel they're losing you is actually the natural consequence they always deserve to experience. The avoidance panic when they finally feel they're losing you isn't unfortunate timing or bad luck. It's the appropriate educational moment that your earlier patience prevented from arriving when it should have. They should have felt this crisis the first time they violated your boundaries, but your forgiveness prevented the natural consequence from teaching them. Think about the timeline. The first time they withdrew without communication. The first time they chose defended comfort over showing up for you. The first time they violated boundary you'd clearly stated. Any of these moments could have produced crisis if you'd enforced consequences immediately. If you'd said, "This behavior is unacceptable, and if it happens again, I'm done," and meant it and enforced it, they'd have experienced crisis years ago. Crisis that might have motivated change while you were still willing to build with changed version of them. But you didn't enforce consequences. You forgave. You gave another chance. You stayed patient. Your patience prevented the natural consequence from arriving, and preventing natural consequence prevented them from learning. They learned instead that patterns could continue without crisis, that your boundaries were negotiable, that forgiveness was guaranteed. Your patience, meant as gift, functioned as enablement that prevented educational consequences from teaching them what words couldn't teach. The crisis they're experiencing now, when you're actually leaving, is the crisis that should have happened the first time, the consequence that should have arrived early. Your excessive patience delayed the education. Don't let guilt about them experiencing crisis now prevent you from maintaining the consequence they should have experienced long ago. The panic proves they always understood what they were risking. They just didn't believe you'd actually enforce consequences until enforcement became imminent. Their panic reveals something crucial. They knew the patterns were problematic, knew you had needs they weren't meeting, knew they were risking the relationship through their behavior. They weren't oblivious. They understood what they were risking. They just didn't believe the risk was real. Didn't believe you'd actually leave. Didn't believe consequences would actually arrive. Your staying despite patterns taught them the risk was theoretical, not real. The panic when you're actually leaving proves they understood all along that their behavior could cost them the relationship. They just didn't believe it would cost them the relationship because you'd always stayed before. The panic is their recognition that risk they knew existed but didn't take seriously is manifesting as actual loss. And this recognition should confirm for you they knew what they were doing, knew they were hurting you, knew they were jeopardizing the relationship. They just chose to continue the patterns anyway because they didn't believe consequences were real. Your leaving makes consequences real. Their panic is them discovering that risk they were willing to take because they didn't believe it was real is costing them exactly what you always said it would cost them. The intensity of their crisis response is proportional to how much they took you for granted, revealing through their panic exactly how valuable you were while they were treating you as guaranteed. The more intense their crisis, the more desperate their vulnerability, the more dramatic their promises, the more out of character their behavior, the more it reveals how much they took you for granted. If you weren't that valuable to them, Losing you wouldn't create this level of crisis. If the relationship wasn't that important, your leaving wouldn't produce this intensity of panic. The crisis is proportional to the gap between how valuable you actually were and how expendable they treated you as. Massive crisis reveals massive gap. They treated you as guaranteed while you were irreplaceable, treated you as tolerable while you were essential, treated you as available despite patterns while you were limited, patience human, with boundaries. The intensity of crisis, when gap closes, when they discover you're irreplaceable, but you're leaving, essential, but unavailable, limited patience, and boundaries enforcing, reveals how catastrophically wrong their assessment was. Let the intensity of their crisis confirm how much you were worth all along, and let that confirmation eliminate any temptation to stay, just because they finally recognize what you've always been worth. Recognition that arrives when you're leaving is too late. You deserved real-time recognition, not crisis-driven recognition. Their intense crisis proves your worth. Use that proof to validate your leaving, not to justify staying. The permanent shift that occurs in you when you see the unexpected thing, but leave anyway. Watching the avoidant drop their defenses and fight for you, and choosing to leave despite their crisis response, creates permanent transformation in you that affects every future relationship in ways that serve your well-being. You learn that you're capable of choosing yourself, even when someone is finally becoming who you wanted them to be, which is the ultimate expression of self-respect. The hardest thing is leaving when they're finally doing the thing you've wanted them to do, when they're vulnerable after being defended, when they're fighting for you after taking you for granted, when they're promising change after maintaining patterns. Every part of you that hoped for this wants to stay and see if it's real. But choosing yourself means leaving anyway. Leaving because crisis-driven change isn't sustainable transformation. Leaving because you deserve someone who didn't need crisis to value you. Leaving because staying would teach your system that you'll accept crisis-driven promises instead of requiring demonstrated change. This choice, to leave when they're doing the unexpected thing, is ultimate self-respect. It's prioritizing your well-being over their crisis. It's choosing your boundaries over their promises. It's valuing yourself enough to require more than crisis-driven vulnerability. Making this choice transforms you, teaches you that you're capable of the hardest version of choosing yourself. And this capability, this knowing, you can choose yourself even when it's most difficult, becomes permanent foundation for all future relationships. You'll never settle for crisis-driven change again, because you prove to yourself you're capable of walking away from it. You discover that your worth isn't determined by whether they fight for you. It's determined by whether you fight for yourself, by refusing to accept less than you deserve. Throughout the relationship, part of you probably measured your worth by their behavior. If they valued you, you were valuable. If they fought for you, you were worth fighting for. If they chose you, you were worthy of being chosen. But leaving when they're finally fighting proves something more important. Your worth isn't determined by their recognition of it. Your worth is intrinsic, constant, independent of whether anyone else recognizes or honors it. And honoring your own worth means fighting for yourself by refusing to accept treatment that doesn't match your value. They're fighting for you now in crisis, but you're fighting for yourself by maintaining boundaries despite their crisis. And you're fighting for yourself, your refusal to accept crisis-driven promises instead of sustained transformation is more important than their fighting for you, because their fighting is temporary crisis response. Your fighting for yourself is permanent commitment to honoring your worth regardless of whether anyone else does. This shift from seeking their recognition of your worth to providing your own recognition through self-protection is permanent transformation that serves every aspect of your life. You understand that the relationship you wanted was never with crisis version of them. It was with sustainably available version they've never demonstrated capacity to be. The vulnerable person dropping defenses in crisis isn't the person you wanted relationship with. The person you wanted was someone who could be vulnerable consistently, who could fight for relationship before crisis, who could recognize your worth while having access to you. Crisis version who appears when they're losing you is compelling, but it's not the person you actually need. You need sustainable version who can access vulnerability without crisis, maintain effort without threat, value you without feeling they're losing you. Crisis version is temporary. Sustainable version requires years of therapeutic work to develop. Leaving crisis version, even though they're finally being vulnerable, is you understanding that crisis version isn't substitute for sustainable version. And this understanding protects you in all future relationships from accepting crisis-driven behavior as evidence of sustainable capacity. You'll require demonstration over time, not promises in crisis. You'll wait for sustained version, not accept crisis version as good enough. This discernment about difference between crisis capacity and sustainable capacity becomes permanent filter that protects you from wasting time on people who can show up in crisis, but not consistently. Why you're leaving, despite the unexpected thing, is the greatest gift you can give, both of them and yourself. Understanding that leaving, despite their crisis response, serves everyone involved, including them, helps you maintain your boundaries without guilt about the pain your leaving creates. Your leaving creates the only conditions where genuine transformation might occur, because staying would relieve crisis and eliminate motivation for uncomfortable, sustained work. If you stay because of their crisis response, the crisis ends. They have you back. The threat of loss is removed. And with threat removed, motivation for difficult, transformative work disappears. Why do years of uncomfortable therapy when staying gave them what they wanted without requiring the work? Your leaving maintains the crisis, maintains the pain that might, if they choose, motivate genuine, sustained therapeutic work. Won't definitely motivate it. Many avoidants never do the work even after painful loss. But if transformation is going to occur, it requires sustained discomfort that motivates sustained effort. Your leaving creates that discomfort. Your staying would eliminate it. So paradoxically, leaving someone you love because they're not capable might be the only thing that creates conditions where they develop capability. Not for you, for themselves and their future. But the leaving is what creates the possibility by maintaining the consequence that makes the work feel necessary. Staying would eliminate the consequence and eliminate the motivation. Leave. Let the consequence teach. Whether they learn or don't learn is their choice. But create the conditions where learning is possible by maintaining the consequence your staying would eliminate. Your refusal to accept crisis-driven promises teaches both of you that words without sustained action are insufficient, a lesson that serves all future relationships. You're teaching yourself and teaching them that promises aren't enough. That crisis-driven vulnerability isn't substitute for sustained demonstration. That wanting to change isn't the same as having changed. This lesson serves you by establishing permanent standard. You require proof, not promises. Demonstration, not intention. Sustained behavioral change, not crisis-driven acknowledgement. This standard protects you in all future relationships from accepting words as substitute for actions. And the lesson serves them, if they're capable of learning, by teaching that crisis-driven promises don't work to restore access after patterns have destroyed relationship. That genuine change requires sustained work demonstrated over time, not dramatic gestures in moment of crisis. Whether they learn this lesson or not, you're learning it, and your learning it serves your future by ensuring you never again accept crisis-driven promises as evidence of transformation. This discernment is gift to yourself that came through pain of leaving someone doing unexpected thing. Honor the gift by maintaining the standard it taught you. You prove to yourself that you're capable of the hardest version of self-love, walking away from potential to protect your actual well-being. The hardest thing is walking away from potential. They might transform. The crisis might motivate real change. If you stayed and gave them chance, maybe this time would be different. Walking away from that potential, from the maybe, from the possibility, from the chance that this time their promises would be fulfilled, requires you to value your actual well-being over potential future that might never materialize. This is hardest version of self-love. Not loving yourself when it's easy. Loving yourself when it requires walking away from compelling possibility to protect yourself from likely repeat of patterns. Doing this, choosing actual well-being over potential transformation, proves to yourself that you're capable of loving yourself enough to make difficult protective choice. And this proof becomes permanent foundation. You know now that you can walk away from potential when protecting yourself requires it. You're capable of the difficult choice. This knowledge serves every future situation where you'll need to choose between possibility and protection. You've proven you can choose protection. That capability is permanent strength that serves your entire life. The unexpected thing they do when they feel they're losing you is real. The vulnerability is genuine. The promises are sincere in the moment. The crisis is creating temporary capacity that looks like transformation. And all of it is insufficient reason to stay with someone who needed crisis to show up the way you needed them to show up consistently. Let them do the unexpected thing. Let them panic and promise and drop their defenses completely. Let all of it happen and leave anyway. Not because you're punishing them, because you understand that crisis response isn't sustainable transformation. Because you deserve someone who doesn't need to feel they're losing you to value you. Because the unexpected thing, however compelling, came too late to matter for a relationship with you, even though it might matter for their growth journey after losing you. Your leaving creates the education they need. Your thriving after leaving proves the education you needed was that you're better off without someone who only fights for you in crisis. Both educations are valuable. Both serve appropriate futures. Theirs is transformation or stagnation after losing you. Yours is building life so extraordinary that whether they transformed becomes irrelevant to your joy. The unexpected thing they're doing is their crisis. Your leaving, despite the unexpected thing, is your freedom. Both are happening. Only one determines your future. You already know which one. Keep choosing it. The unexpected thing they'll do is temporary. Your freedom from accepting crisis-driven change is permanent. That's the path. That's your power. That's the life you build by understanding that the most unexpected thing isn't what they'll do when they feel they're losing you. It's what you'll do when you finally understand that leaving someone who only becomes who you need in crisis is the greatest expression of self-love you're capable of. Do that. Be that. Build that life. Let the unexpected thing they do be interesting weather in your past, while you're creating extraordinary sunshine in your present and future. That's freedom. That's your answer to everything they'll do when they feel they're losing you. Not staying to see if it's real. Leaving because you already know that real transformation takes years, not moments, and you're not willing to bet your well-being on their potential anymore. You're betting on yourself. finally, completely. That's what their unexpected thing actually teaches you. Not that they're capable, that you're capable of choosing yourself regardless of what they become capable of. That's power. That's your future. Live it.